Shalom, I'm Jonathan Reich. This is Midrash. And for this class, I want to begin by coming at Midrash sort of the other way from what we've been doing. That is, I want us to look at some biblical texts together that have some things going on in them and see if we can sort of guess what the Midrash is going to be. Do it sort of backwards rather than reading a Midrash and looking at the biblical texts. Let's look at the biblical texts and try and create a Midrash and see how we do. So the texts I want to look at are about the prophetess Miriam, the sister of Moses and Aaron. And let's just dive right in and take a look at our first one, which is the book of Exodus, chapter 17. Which is a story about Massa and Meribah. So, from the wilderness of sin, the whole Israelite community continued by stages, as the Lord would command. They encamped at Rephidim, and there was no water for the people to drink. The people quarreled with Moses. "Give us water to drink," they said. And Moses replied to them, "Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you try the Lord?" But the people thirsted there for water, and the people grumbled against Moses and said, "Why did you bring us up from Egypt to kill us and our children and livestock with thirst?" Moses cried out to the Lord, saying, "What shall I do with this people? Before long they will be stoning me." Then the Lord said to Moses, "Pass before the people, take with you some of the elders of Israel, and take along the rod with which you struck the Nile, and set out. I will be standing there before you on the rock at Horeb. Strike the rock, and water will issue from it, and the people will drink." And Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel. The place was named Massa and Meribah because the Israelites quarreled, and because they tried the Lord, saying, "Is the Lord present among us or not?" That's a pretty well-known story, Massa and Meribah, and testing and quarreling and testing and quarreling, and it's straightforward. People are thirsty. They grumble against Moses. Moses goes and sees what he can do about it, and he's told to use this rock, and water will come out from it. Let's look at Numbers, the book of Numbers, Bamidbar, chapter 20, verse 1. The Israelites arrived in a body at the wilderness of Tzin on the first new moon, and the people stayed at Kadesh. Miriam died there and was buried there. The community was without water, and they joined against Moses and Aaron. The people quarreled with Moses, saying, "If only we had perished when our brothers perished at the instance of the Lord. Why have you brought the Lord's congregation into the wilderness for us and our beasts to die there? Why did you make us leave Egypt to bring us to this wretched place, a place with no grain or figs or vines or pomegranates? There's not even water to drink." Moses and Aaron came away from the congregation to the entrance of the tent of meeting and fell on their faces. The presence of the Lord appeared to them, and the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "You and your brother Aaron take the rod and assemble the community, and before their very eyes order the rock to yield its water. Thus you shall produce water for them from the rock and provide drink for the congregation and their beasts." Moses took the rod from before the Lord as he had commanded him. Moses and Aaron assembled the congregation in front of the rock, and he said to them, "Listen, you rebels, shall we get water for you out of this rock?" And Moses raised his hand and struck the rock twice with his rod. Out came copious water, and the community and their beasts drank. We've got these two stories, very similar, describing really the same incident, or very, very similar incidents. And what do we do with this? I spend a lot of time training in historical critical methods, so I know about that, and what a modern reader would do is say that this is a doublet, that there are two different stories describing the same thing that come from different sources, and they have been integrated into the story. Both versions are used, and that's why you have this story twice. It's really the same story, two different versions, and you're given both, and that's what you have. Not so for the Midrashist, for the traditional reader, who doesn't accept that there are different documents or different authors within the sacred text, who sees repetition as something that doesn't happen, and if there are different versions of the same story, well, it tells you something. That's the real heart of it, that anything that looks like a problem is really there if you work it enough to tell you something. But the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "Because you did not trust me enough to affirm my sanctity in the sight of the Israelite people, therefore you shall not lead this congregation into the land that I have given them. Those are the waters of Meribah," meaning that the Israelites quarreled with the Lord, through which he affirmed his sanctity. So with a Midrashic perspective, what do we do with these texts? Well, some problems. Are there two stories about Meribah? There seems to be. Why are there two places called Meribah where the same thing happened? They seem to be at different places. Wilderness of Sin versus Sin, the Tzadi. Again, the historical critical reader might have something different to say about that, but the traditional reader accepts the difference and sees these as two separate incidents. So another question is, why did the water stop the second time? It seems to have stopped. We got this water from at Massa and Meribah in Exodus, and then in Numbers it seems to have stopped. Why? Well, there's this thing that happened, which is that Miriam dies, and so the rabbis put together this incident, Miriam dying. It's like with Isaac's age with the Akedah, because it happens right there, they assume sort of a causal link. Miriam dies and there's no water all of a sudden. What do you do with that midrashically? You say, well, it's because Miriam died that there was no water. That is, Miriam was instrumental in providing water somehow for the Israelites. And this association of Miriam with this well, this rock that brought forth water, is one that occurs in Rabbinic Judaism and throughout various Jewish orders to this day. In Passover, we have this newer tradition of Miriam's cup, in which water is used during the Passover Seder, and it's associated with Miriam based on this idea that when Miriam died, the Israelites all of a sudden had no water because the well had dried up, and that it was because Miriam died that the well dried up and there was no water. Now this is the neat trick. What does it mean that there was a rock which Moses struck, that is the well of Massa and Meribah, at this first place in Exodus, where the story is placed, and then at this place in Numbers where it stopped. Apparently, it was not giving water because the Israelites needed water because Miriam had died. What are we to make of that? Well, think in the Midrashic mindset. There was a well at this place, and then there was a well with the same name and the same characteristics at another place. What happened? The well was moving. The well was moving with them. That's the Midrash, which I think we can construct from this. We can understand that the Israelites having water in the wilderness was, first of all, due to Miriam, who is associated with water, and other places too. I think the association of Miriam with water is not solely based on the Numbers text, but also on the idea that, first of all, baby Moses, at least partly through Miriam's agency, being placed in a basket in the river, and with her singing the song at the sea in Exodus 15. So you get sort of an association of Miriam with water, and here it's made more explicit. And then what's going on with the rock? It's traveling with them. It's floating around, as it were, giving them water. And when Miriam dies, it stops, and Moses has to sort of reactivate it, which he does by hitting it, which is a problem, and that's a whole other story. But we're talking about Miriam here. And this is, in fact, exactly what the Midrash says, or various Midrashim have regarding these incidents, that Miriam's death is the cause of the lack of water in the Numbers incident, and that this well has been traveling with the Israelites on their wanderings. You can see this in Talmud, for instance, which has some midrashim in it, and in Masechet Tanit, page 9a, 9 Aleph, Rabbi Yossi, son of Rabbi Yehuda, says, 3 good sustainers rose up for the Jewish people during the Exodus from Egypt. They are Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. And 3 good gifts were given from heaven through their agency. And these are they: the well of water, the pillar of cloud, and the manna. He elaborates, the well was given to the Jewish people in the merit of Miriam. The pillar of cloud was in the merit of Aaron, and the manna in the merit of Moses. When Miriam died, the well disappeared, as it is stated, and Miriam died there. And it says thereafter in the next verse, and there was no water for the congregation. Rashi comments on this, and comments on the well of Miriam. The rock and the water which was flowing from it were rolling around and going with Israel. So there you have it, a ready-made midrash, constructed by us and reinforced by the rabbis in the Talmud. I want to make sure we get to everything that I wanted to present to you. So this is a slightly inelegant and abrupt transition to looking at other midrashim and moving outside of Midrash Rabbah, which is mostly what we've been using so far. And Midrash Rabbah is, you can't say the best, but it's certainly the standard midrashic collection. When people talk about the Midrash, they mean Midrash Rabbah in the same way that the Talmud is Talmud Bavli rather than Yerushalmi. And there's a lot of different midrashic collections, but Midrash Rabbah is the standard. But here I want to look at some of the early midrashim known as Tanaitic Midrash or Midrash Halacha. And those, there are four main works of Midrash Halacha, or covering four books. There's really three of them. It kind of depends on how you want to divide them up. The main works are a commentary on Exodus called Mechilta de Rabbi Yishmael, a work called Sifrei, meaning the books in Aramaic, which is a commentary on Numbers and Deuteronomy, and then one called Sifra, the book, which is on Leviticus. And sometimes people split up Sifrei Numbers and Sifrei Deuteronomy, but those are the basic ones. So I want to look at Mechilta de Rabbi Yishmael now and see what it has to say about the giving of the Torah, where you find some really interesting midrashim about Exodus 19 and the theophany there and the actual giving of the Torah on Sinai. So this selection, Mechilta de Rabbi Yishmael 19, on Exodus 19, 2, verse 7. And they encamped in the desert. The Torah was given openly in a public place. For if it were given in Eretz Yisrael, they could say to the nations of the world, you have no portion of it, in it. But it was given openly in a public place, and all who want to take it may come and take it. I might think it was given at night. It is therefore written, and this is Exodus 19:16, and it was on the third day when it was morning, etc. I might think that it was given in silence. It is therefore written, the same place, and there were thunders and lightnings. I might think that they did not hear the thunders. It is therefore written, and all the people saw the thunders and the lightnings. And Psalms 29:4, the voice of the Lord in majesty, etc. The wicked Bilam said to all those standing with him, the Lord will give strength to his people, and they all responded, the Lord will bless his people in peace. This is a pretty straightforward piece of Midrash here. It's using proof texts, biblical proof texts, to sort of assemble together a narrative with the meaning that it wants, which is that the other nations of the world, besides Israel, could have accepted the Torah if they wanted to. One of the questions that Mechilta de Rabbi Yishmael is asking is, how come the Torah is given to Israel? Is that fair? Is that just? Does Israel deserve the Torah? Is Israel somehow better that they merited getting this amazing gift of the Torah when the other nations didn't? And so it addresses some of those questions. It was given in a public place. That is, it wasn't given hidden away in Israel somewhere, in some corner of Tel Aviv, but on Mount Sinai, a public place. Anybody could have come there and received it. Similarly, during the daytime, not at night, when other people might not have known to go there, might not have been able to get there, couldn't see to get there. Broad daylight. Similarly, with loud thunders that would have announced it, so nobody could say, well, I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know it was today. You have the idea that there are these loud thunders that any nation could have heard what was going on and come and joined in. That's some very interesting theology there, that Israel didn't deserve the Torah more than anyone else, perhaps, but Israel accepted the Torah. So that's sort of why it's given to Israel. Nobody else came. Nobody else showed up. In that vein, I want to continue with the Mechilta de Rabbi Ishmael, skipping a little ahead to what I think is a really interesting Midrash, and sort of a fitting summary of a lot of this material, dealing with this same question about really Jewish particularism and the giving of the Torah to Israel. So, Mechilta de Rabbi Ishmael on Exodus 20. And it starts out, Dvar Acher. It's another interpretation from what there was in the previous chapter. Again, a hallmark of Midrash. So, I am the Lord your God. When the Holy One, blessed be he, arose and proclaimed, I am the Lord your God, the earth took ill, as it is written, Judges 5:4. O Lord, when you came forth from Seir, when you strode from the field of Edom, the earth shook, the heavens too dripped. And, continuing verse 5, mountains dripped before the Lord. And, completely different text, Psalms 29:4, the voice of the Lord is strength, the voice of the Lord in glory. And, verse 9 of that psalm, and in his sanctuary all proclaim glory, until their houses were suffused with the splendor of the Shekhinah. And it was for this reason that the nations of the world were solicited to accept the Torah, so as not to give them a pretext vis-a-vis the Shekhinah, to say, had we been solicited, we would have accepted it. They were solicited and did not accept it. As it is written, Deuteronomy 33:2, and he said, the Lord came from Sinai, etc. He came and revealed himself to the sons of the wicked Esav and asked them, will you accept the Torah? They, what is written in it? He, you shall not kill. They, but this is what we have inherited from our father, as it is written in Genesis 27:40, by your sword shall you live. What we've got so far is the idea that when God is giving the Aseret HaDibrot, the Ten Commandments, the first one in particular, the Shekhinah, the divine presence, is suffusing Israel, and Israel is sort of receiving this holiness. But there's this question of, do other nations, is this fair? The same question as in the previous Midrash we looked at. The other nations of the world could say, if you had asked us, we would have accepted the Torah. It's the same sort of idea as before when the Midrash was proclaiming that that the Torah had to be given in the open and during the day, so that other nations couldn't say, well, we couldn't get to Israel, or, well, it was night, so we didn't know it was happening. Here it's showing you that God's voice suffused Israel with holiness, but that previously, because it has this line about coming from Seir, coming from Edom, that it posits that God had been offering the Torah to these other nations first, really, and that at least with regard to the Edomites, they had sort of done the smart thing and asked, well, what's in it? What's in this Torah? And when they learned that they weren't allowed to murder people, they said no thanks, because that's sort of what they do. And continue on in this vein with some of the other surrounding peoples. So after going to the Edomites, that is the descendants of Esav, it says, God revealed himself to the sons of Ammon and Moab and asked them, will you accept the Torah? They, what is written in it? He, you shall not commit adultery. they. But we are all the sons of incest, as it is written in Genesis 19:36, and the two daughters of Lot conceived by their father. How then shall we accept it? So, in the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, Lot's daughters, thinking that they're the last people in the world, become pregnant by Lot, and they're the descendants of those children, Moab and Ben-Ami, are the Moabites and the Ammonites. So this would not be allowed under the Torah. So the Moabites and the Ammonites say, well, we can't have that. That's our heritage. That's where we come from. We can't have that. God came and revealed himself to the sons of Ishmael and asked them, will you accept the Torah? They, what is written in it? He, you shall not steal. They, but this is the blessing by which our father was blessed, as it is written, Genesis 16:2, and he, Ishmael, he, that is Ishmael, shall be a brutish man, etc. The blessing that is given to Ishmael then is that he will be a wild ass of a man, and his hand will be against everyone, and the rabbis sort of extend that to mean that he'll be a robber. He'll be a highwayman, a thief. And likewise, his descendants who are offered the Torah don't want it because it would forbid their ancestor from doing what he did. So they don't want the Torah. When he came to Israel, so God finally comes to Israel, and then quoting Deuteronomy 32:2, in his right hand the fire of the law for them. They all opened their mouths and cried, as in Exodus 24:7, all that the Lord says we will do and we will hear. Naseh v'nishma. When Israel is offered the Torah, and this is sort of the linchpin of this, their response is Naseh v'nishma, we will do and we will hear. That is, we'll do whatever you say, and then we'll listen to what it is. Seemingly backwards. Seems that you should hear what's in the Torah before you agree to do it. But Israel was so eager to accept the Torah that they accepted it before even hearing what was in it. And then they heard what was in it. Contrary to all the other nations who were offered the Torah but wanted to know what was in it and then rejected it once they found out. So Israel gets the Torah. Thus it is written, Habakkuk 3:6, he stood and measured the land, he looked and dispersed the nations. That is, God dismissed, threw out, got rid of all the surrounding nations before Israel because they rejected the Torah. The idea is that Israel is not, the specialness of Israel doesn't come from God. It comes from their own willingness to accept God's commandments. It's not that God wasn't fair. It's not that God didn't give other nations the opportunity to accept the Torah. It's that none of them were faithful enough to sort of take that leap and accept it. They all nitpicked about what was in it, and they didn't want to do it, and it's too hard for them. So they rejected it, whereas Israel just said, yep, we want that. We want whatever it is. As a complete aside, I realized that in reading through these, God is referred to by the male pronoun, which is not theologically proper. In Hebrew, it's grammatically proper. In English, it is not. It is less so. You don't have to make God a he. The proper pronoun for God is God, but these are the translations we have, and I don't like to insert extra mentions of God's name where they're not. So I'm just sort of going with the he, with the understanding that God is not male, not a man. In languages where pronouns clearly indicate gender, it's not really proper to use he because God is not a he. So the idea of the other nations being offered the Torah is expanded upon here. It continues, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar said, if the sons of Noah could not abide by the 7 mitzvot commanded them, how much more so could they not abide by all the mitzvot of the Torah? In rabbinic theology, there's this idea of the Sheva mitzvot b'nei Noach, the 7 mitzvot that are given to Noah, which are incumbent upon all humanity. And among those are not stealing, not killing, and not committing incest, which are the things that these previous nations had been doing, because of which they didn't want to accept the Torah. So the idea is that there are these 7 basic mitzvot that all are incumbent upon all humanity, and Kal v'chomer, using that kind of argument, if these nations couldn't even handle those 7 mitzvot, how could they handle the 613 that are in the Torah? They couldn't, is the answer. An analogy, the mashal form here. A king appoints 2 caretakers, one over stores of grain and one over stores of silver and gold. The first bridles at not having been appointed over the stores of silver and gold, and the second says to him, empty one, if you were faithless with grain, how much more so with silver and gold? So if the guy can't handle taking care of the grain, he's certainly not going to be put in charge of the really valuable stuff. If the sons of Noah could not abide by 7 mitzvot alone, how much more so could they not abide by the 613 mitzvot of the Torah? It's a good, fair question. Why was the Torah not given in Eretz Israel? So as not to provide a pretext to the nations of the world. Because it was not given in our land, that is why we did not accept it. Hearkening back to the previous Midrash, this is taking away this idea that that Israel is so special, that only Israel could have gotten the Torah. The idea is that the other nations could have gotten it too, they just didn't want it. They didn't want to be as special as Israel. They didn't want to be singled out. They didn't want to be chosen. They didn't accept the Torah. Another interpretation, and this is, as you see, this is something that's incompatible with the previous interpretation of why the Torah was given in Eretz Israel, but you don't have to believe either one. So as not to rouse contention among the tribes, one saying, it was given in my land, the other, it was given in my land. That is why it was given in the open desert. In 3 settings was the Torah given: desert, fire, and water. Just as these are free for all, so Torah. So the other possible explanation is that the Torah was given outside of the land of Israel so that no tribe could claim that their territory contained the place where the Torah was given. So they would have sort of a special connection to it. It's a similar idea as we have in America with the District of Columbia, that the capital was not supposed to be in any state. No particular state could say, well, I'm the home of the capital. It was supposed to be sort of extraterritorial. And in the same way, no particular tribe was supposed to have the wellspring of Torah in their territory. A different explanation from the idea that it was given in open territory so that the other nations couldn't say, well, it was given in Israel, and therefore we didn't have access to it. It's a similar idea, but another interpretation. I really like that line of speculation that they're working on here, because it addresses some really contemporary issues, which are the relationship of Israel to other nations, other peoples, and the exclusiveness of the Torah to Israel. This presents it as being much less exclusive, although not in possession of other peoples, but potentially. There's nothing intrinsically different about Israel from the other nations except how they acted, except their willingness to accept it. Certainly not better, but more willing to take on the job that's being offered. And in fact, so eager that they do it without even hearing what it is, because they're loyal and they trust God in a way that the surrounding nations don't. They want to know what's in it first. It's not exactly the answer that we give today, and it is an older type of perspective, but it shows that the rabbis are thinking about those same issues that we think about today. Do other nations have access to the Torah? Do other nations have access to divine wisdom? And the answer is yes. And they could have been part of Israel or the same as Israel, except for certain historical circumstances of their behavior. Nothing intrinsic to them, except their modes of behavior keep them from embracing the Torah. So what can we take from all of this, both from these readings that we've done just now and from our study of Midrash as a whole? Well, first of all, I hope that we've gotten at least a taste of some of the more famous Midrashim and some less famous ones, and that they're less intimidating and less mysterious than they have been in the past. But also that reading and the act of reading and studying Scripture is more varied than we sometimes think. We all know how to read. We've been taught that. And we know how to read sophisticated texts, and we know how to close read them. But Midrash and traditional reading in general, and Midrash on top of that, posits different kinds of reading, different ways of reading, different methods of reading, different assumptions for what you do when you come across something that looks strange, something that doesn't make sense, something that seems to contradict another thing, something that seems repetitive. We have certain explanations for all those phenomena in our modern reading, but traditional readers weren't stupid. That's one of the big takeaways from this. Sometimes we'll see, well, there's a contradiction there, and how could people have not seen that, or how could they not have seen that there seems to be two stories about striking the rock at Meribah? It seems so obvious. But it didn't to them. It wasn't obvious. What was obvious is that there was something underlying that. Their hermeneutical stance, the traditional reading and the Midrashic reading, tell you that when you hit one of those bumps in reading, here's what you do. And you can look at it in these different ways. You can look for a gezerah shava with this unusual word. Is it linking it to another verse? If you don't know when something happened, can you tell from a verse that was just before it or just after it that you do know when that happened? And perhaps most of all, that you don't have to come up with one single answer, one size fits all, to decode these verses. You do have to come up with that when you're talking about community standards for halakha, for something like, do you have to break a glass at a wedding? Is this chicken kosher? Is this meal kosher? And any kind of thing like that. Is this mezuzah affixed to the door properly? Something that you needs to have a yes or no answer. When you're dealing with this kind of agadic interpretation, there's just no need for it. There's not a need for that kind of authority. What you're trying to do is see where the text takes you if you think about it in these ways. What happens, when you think about, did God offer the Torah to other people? Did God, you'd think, well, is there a text that says God went to any other people? Yeah, there's that one about Seir that this brings up. Or you may have a legendary material saying God offered the Torah to the Edomites, but they didn't want it because it said you can't murder. That's sort of a mixture. There's legendary material, and there's also the fact that the Torah says don't murder, and that Esau was seen to be a murderer, which we saw in our first Midrash. It sort of all comes around, you see. There's hidden structure. And what I hope people can take from this is a sense of really the richness of Midrashic reading, and the a certain flexibility and fluidity to it that allows these texts to be used in a dazzling variety of manners, where they can be applied to all sorts of situations and all sorts of theologies that do not seem apparent from a more contextual reading. Midrash doesn't care about context, especially, and it allows you to really take these verses and these stories to places that you wouldn't otherwise be able to. And I hope we've gotten a taste of that and some of the techniques that they use to do it, because it's not random. There are techniques that they're using, as we've seen. And it's really a fascinating thing to investigate. So I hope that you will do that. I hope you will read more Midrash and investigate more. Thank you very much for studying with me. Shalom.